All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Good evening and welcome to our genealogy workshop series. This is our first series, beginning genealogy and family history with Nicka Smith, made possible by the Black Reparations Project with Mills College at Northeastern in Oakland, California. Welcome to those of you here on the West Coast and to those of you on the East Coast and everywhere in between. My name is Ife Tayo Walker. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Associate Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Mills College at Northeastern here in Oakland. I have the honor of pouring libation to start us off in a space of gratitude and humility as we go forth in this endeavor. For those of you that have participated in libation ceremonies, this is simply a recognition of our ancestors. Many of us are here because we want to honor our ancestors. We want to know who they were. We want them to be a part of our lives, their memories to be alive for us, to understand what their lives might have been like. And so I wanted to open this very, very briefly and start by just giving thanks to all of our ancestors. I give thanks to those whose names we know and whose names we don't. And I have a plant and some water. I'm going to pour a little water in our plant here. Water being that conductor of energy, that element that connects and binds all of us to one another, to this earth, that keeps us connected to one another, and into a plant, being the earth that we came from and the earth that we will go into. And again, this is to lift up our ancestors. I only have a moment, so I'm going to ask all of us here to either hold in your hearts the names of ancestors that you would like to experience this with, those whom you would like to know that you are a part of this journey and that they are going to be in this journey with you. And I welcome you to let us know who they are in the chat if you'd like to. Just type in the names of those ancestors that you'd like to begin in. And as I see names come up, I'm going to say Ashe. Ashe is a Yoruba word. It means let it have power. It infuses our words with power. We might think of it like when we say amen after the end of a prayer. So I see some names and I say Ashe. Just keep it coming. Thank you for participating. Ashe. We are inviting them to be a part of this experience with us. Thank you. Ashe. We honor all of those ancestors. We want them to know that we have not forgotten you, that you are important, and that we are here because of you. So in the name of our ancestors, I want you to continue to put the names in the chat. I'm going to close out shortly, but I do not want you to stop. This is important. This is what we're here for. I call on my mother, Beverly Pierce. I call on my grandmother, Robertine Wilson. I will continue to monitor and to honor the names of those ancestors that you are listing in the chat, and I appreciate you for doing this. I ask that as we go through this workshop with Nicka, that we continue to hold their memories in our hearts, that we continue to see their faces, understand and know their names, remember, see the street, the house they lived on, whatever it is that resonates for us as we go through this. And at the end of this, we will have fulfilled a promise. We will have done something amazing on their behalf. So continue to put the names in there. I'm going to say Ashe 3 times and pass it on to Ashley. Feel free to just in the chat, put Ashe, say it to yourself. Ashe, Ashe, Asheo. Thank you for participating.
Thank you,
Ashley?
Ife. Thank you, Ife. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ife, for the beautiful libations in honor of the ancestors. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Ashley Adams. and I serve as the director for the Black Reparations Project at Mills College at Northeastern University, an initiative dedicated to promoting education and research on Black reparations policies. We create opportunities for individuals to come together to study, discuss, and contribute to Black reparations policymaking. I am also a fourth generation descendant of formerly enslaved people who helped settle the town of Nicodemus, Kansas, and ancestors who survived the Tulsa Race Massacre. As president of the Nicodemus Historical Society, I am deeply honored to preserving the legacy of the ancestors and an honor to welcome you all to this special virtual event tonight. Along with our academic community, we're joined tonight by several descendant communities from Nicodemus, Kansas to Charlottesville, Virginia, and beyond. And if you're representing a descendant community, feel free to give a shout out in the chat. Thank you for joining us for this first of our three genealogy workshop series. Learning about genealogy and discovering your ancestral roots can be a transformative experience. And in remembrance of our beloved bell hooks, the Black Reparations Project embraces the belief that education is the practice of freedom. And in that spirit, throughout this genealogy series, we invite you to align with our core principles, which are one, cultivating joy, two, making healing a priority, and three, leveraging the transformative power of love as we explore genealogy and its role in reparative justice and community wellness. This series offers a chance to deepen our understanding of reparations and support access to reparative benefits while promoting genealogy awareness and a culture of healing. I also would like to extend our thanks to all of the sponsors that were listed on our website and on the slides that you saw while you were in the waiting room, and who made this event possible. A special thanks to Mills College at Northeastern University, Dean's Office. We are also grateful for the technical support provided by Emin the Mass Media Group with multimedia producer and director and reparations advocate, Lumoya G, and longtime producer turned reparations advocate, Kim K, who will be serving as our moderator this evening. Now it is my great privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Nicka Smith. Nicka is a host, a consultant, a documentarian with over 20 years of experience as a genealogist, specializing in researching enslaved communities. She is an expert in Mississippi Delta genealogy and has been featured on Today, Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, and an Emmy-winning episode of Who Do You Think You Are? She is also the host of Black Pro-Gen Live, an innovative web show with more than 130 episodes. Nicka has been interviewed by National Geographic, Time, USA Today, and the New York Times. She is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and a leader in the descendant community movement, serving on the board of descendants of enslaved communities at the University of Virginia, among many other roles. She is also the family historian for the Atlas family of Lake Providence, East Carroll, and the founder of Trash 250, a community of over 8,000 descendants. She currently works as a senior story producer at Ancestry community on Patreon. Thank you, Nicka, for your incredible work in helping us to discover and honor our ancestral roots. It is with deep gratitude that I ask you all to join me in welcoming Nicka to share her insights and to guide us on this meaningful journey. And I'm now going to go ahead and pass the virtual mic over to you, Nicka. Welcome.
Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Dr. Adams, and for the wonderful libation, Ife, to set the space and the time that we are in. As I start this presentation, one of the things that I want everyone to think about as I'm going through a lot of information is really figure out what your why is. For some people, it's to trace their tree back as far as they possibly can. For other people, it's to prepare for a family reunion that is coming up. For others, it is to maybe be the first person to diligently put down on paper who your ancestors are and who your relatives are, because all you've heard is from the verbal perspective. Or for others, you may be wanting to put together a book that you can leave your children or you can leave other people in your family. Regardless, at the heart of all of this is to remember your why. And when you get frustrated, when you have challenges, when you have success, or when you feel like you failed, you always go back to your why, because you're going to experience all of those things. As much as I wish that we can snap our fingers and everything would be done, and I could, gesture my hand wildly and a tree would come out of it and everything would be finished, that's not quite how this works. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get started, because there is a lot to talk about this evening. All right, so using the chat is an important part of this interaction with you all. So I want to make sure that you toggle your chat on to speak to everyone, not just the host and the panelists, so you can have this experience with folks who are here live, or if you're watching a recording, just imagine you're here, and as my grandmother used to say, you can talk to yourself as long as you don't talk back. That was the litmus test for whether or not everything was okay with you. You may believe that yourself, but hey, it's up to you. All right. So let's get our qualifications down. What is genealogy and what is family history? You may have seen these terms used interchangeably. To me, they are very similar topics, but there is a little bit of a difference. With genealogy, it is lineage focused, right? In fact, if you check the chat, if you're here live, there is the president of one of the Black lineage societies in the house with us, Dr. Evelyn McDowell. She is the president of Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage. It is a lineage society that is dedicated to folks who are in pursuit of looking for their enslaved ancestors. And when you have proven out a line of your family going back to an enslaved ancestors on paper, you can submit that to them and they will grant you membership into this illustrious organization. And for some people, it may be very easy. If you're someone who's like me, who has connections back to the Cherokee Nation, all we have to do is find an ancestor with a Dawes card. And if you find one that's on the Freedman roll, it literally has a field on there that says slave of. Or for others, you might have to go through a series of other documents. But with genealogy in its purest form, when it springs up from movements in the late 19th century to the early 20th century, it is really based in pedigrees. Whose son, whose daughter, the study of pedigrees, an account of the descent of a person, family, or group from an ancestor or early forms. It is very facty, right? So there's a question already in the chat. What if our ancestors were enslaved in the Caribbean? Absolutely. Yes, you could be a part of Sons and Daughters as well, as long as you have proof on paper that someone could substantiate that this is your ancestor going back to slavery. Yep, thank you for putting the link there in the chat, Dr. McDowell. So the reason why I bring up the lineage society is because Sons and Daughters is not the only lineage society. Others exist. You may have heard of National Daughters of the Revolution, right? DAR. You may have heard of Confederate Daughters of America. You might have heard of the Mayflower Society. All of these organizations are lineage societies where people are doing the genealogical work to trace their family histories back to whoever the intended people are that they want to memorialize, whether it's a Mayflower person, whether it is an enslaved person like Sons and Daughters, whether it is a patriot or somebody who was on the side of America for the American Revolution as opposed to the British, whatever. All of that stuff is very he begat, he begat, he begat, she begat, she begat, she begat. Where family history differs, and this is the space that I like to live in, is what I call the dash. Genealogy is focused on the birth date and the death date. What I like is the dash between the two. What caused that person to be born in that place? What caused them to die in that place? How did they get from here to there? What happened between those two dates? When you walk out to a cemetery, do you get context on all of those folks' lives outside of the time that they were born and when they died? For some people, their headstones only reflect their names. They don't tell you anything about who that person is. So for me, I love to live in family history, the study of past events related to a group of people who are related to each other, a person's children, or a group of related people, including people who lived in the past. And here's the thing about family history, especially for marginalized groups of people, it does not necessarily mean that the group of people are related by blood. How many of y'all got an aunt, fill in the blank, and that woman ain't not near your auntie? That's your mama's best friend, right? Thank you for raising a hand. Somebody raised a hand like, yes, that's me. That's all of us, okay? Used to come over, maybe they reneged on their books for spades, okay? Maybe they were domino, your daddy's domino partner. That's uncle whoever, but that was not really your uncle. And you remember the day when you found out that there was no blood relation. You couldn't believe that that was not your auntie or not your uncle. Those folks are just as important in our family history research because sometimes, because they sat at that bid whist or that spades table, they have details and context for your family history that your mama or your aunties ain't gonna tell you. Or they got to Chicago together because the families left at the same time. So again, don't think about this as just blood relations, because here's where the rubber meets the road. And I hope many of you who are here listening understand this. Because of the nature of the slave trade, and because of all those names that you all typed in that chat, some who were formerly enslaved and some who were not, because of that capitalistic system, family connections were severed for what we thought was forever. And we had to make family out of whoever we could. That's why we can't sit here and be stuck on blood all day long. That's not how this works for us. Not then and not now. All right. So nuts and bolts, get your pencils ready. Right. Thank you. Fictive kin. If you've ever worked in social services, and especially with young people who are in foster care or who are potentially going through the process of adoption, the term that is used is called fictive kin, the family that you make or you create. Add that to your dialogue, because here's the thing. Again, we all got it. We've all had it. We just never named it that. So step one is not to go online and start putting in names and searching to see what you're going to find. That's not step one. Step one is to capture what you know. When you do not favor the living sources that you have in your life from a genealogical or historical perspective, you will regret doing so when those folks die and you can't ask them no questions no more. Stop putting it off. If you needed a nudge, let me give you the nudge. Why am I talking about this? Because here's the thing. You are the president of the University of Sewell, or for Dr. Adams, or for Ife, Walker. If you are the president of that university, there are certain things that you know as the president that other people don't know. And you have professors or chancellors or deans who you can reach out to leverage what they know and to utilize their expertise. Consider your brain trust of your family. What do you know? Start with yourself. Folks get a little crazy and they want to prove that they were related to Pocahontas. Jesse Jackson was my third cousin. My favorite one for more recently, I am a descendant of Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves don't have no living descendants. He doesn't. But people chase proximity to well-known people, historical people, and in the process of doing that, they forget the entire family that they have. So don't start with that being your North Star. Start with what you know. Document going back as far as you can. For some people, they may not be able to name all four of their grandparents. For some people, they may only have nicknames for aunts and uncles. That is fine. Write that down, capture that, And then when you finally get the name of that person, then you can update that. But don't neglect what you know, and don't neglect what your parents, your relatives, and you see, fictive kin, what they know. All of that is super important, and it's helping you fill in the dots on the information that you have in your existing brain trust. Now, with step 2, it is not to go online and search. No, it ain't. Because if you were the president of Adams, you got to know what's sitting in your library. You got to know what's sitting on your servers at your university. That's before we go out and start searching and trying to bring stuff in. You are going to gather documents from your home and the homes of relatives. What kind of stuff am I talking about? Y'all already know how we are about them funeral programs and people confessing hope in Christ at an early age. Y'all know that. Why do we all use that if that's not something that is universal to us as a culture, right? They united under the leadership of Reverend Doctor whoever at that church. Those funeral programs and memorial programs are priceless because in the Black community, there are often few times for Black people to be documented in a way that they want to be remembered, where someone asks them about their life. Those programs are capturing that, even down to who got the body. Think about that. Somebody drops dead, who got the body? And you're like, well, why does the mortuary matter? Yes, it does, because again, if we're talking Oakland, California, we going to Foucher's or we going to CP Bannon. Where the service gonna be? Chapel of the Chimes. Why do I know this? I ain't lived in Oakland 11 years, but I know where people go for funeral services. Why? Because families they tend to stick to the same mortuaries. That's a clue. So if you know your family has been at Fouché since the beginning of time, and you don't have a death date for someone, or you know that they handled the service, you can go there and get information. They're telling you on the back, services entrusted to on the back of that program. That's one document. Think about the deed records, tax records, marriage certificates, death certificates, birth certificates, family books. Maybe your family has put together a pamphlet for the family reunion. We are leaving so much stuff on the table and ignoring it in order to go online and find stuff. You all, sometimes there are questions you cannot get the answers to unless you go through the home repository. The answer ain't online. So we ain't searching yet. You start with what you know. You start with what your family knows. You're gathering documents. You're creating your University of Adams or University of Walker library so that you have something to go back to. I have been in this for more than 25 years, and I still refer back to stuff that I collected at the very beginning. You will never get away from it. Great comments. Obits are a great source, especially the old ones. They tell how it was. My great grandfather, I didn't even know they had one for him, y'all. But I knew I made it as a researcher when my grandmother gave me her funeral programs. She wouldn't let nobody touch them things. But when she handed them over to me, like, let me give these to my grandbaby because I know she's going to take care of them, I was finding programs for folks that I didn't even know had them, including my great grandfather, where my aunt wrote it. And she had me hollering laughing because she said he died at the hospital in New Orleans. Now, y'all know how big of a city New Orleans is. What is the hospital? For my family, we already knew what one it was. Charity. How do we know it was Charity? Because that's where she worked. So for her, there was no other hospital. When I pulled up his death certificate, where did he die? Charity. That's the hospital. She even had what time he died. She listed her siblings' street addresses in that he leaves behind to cherish his memory, all the kids, their addresses. Wonderful genealogical information. Right, records of military service. You guys are listing great stuff in the chat. Court documents. In Pittsburgh, it's Waters Funeral Home. Right, save all my family's obituaries. What a beautiful gift. When I found the obituaries from my grandma and great grandma, allowed to know relatives' names I never knew about. Right. Right, right, right. The other thing I got to say about obituaries, and we're going to get petty for a little bit, it's all dependent on who wrote it. I sat down. I had a close friend. Her daddy died. He didn't have no wife. Wife, he was separated, divorced from the wife, divorced from her mama. And it came time to sit down and write that program, as the folks in my family call it, and program, it was a program. And I'm the genealogist. So I'm like, okay, list your mom, list the wife. And her mother sat there and said, oh, I don't include that marriage. And I'm thinking, as the researcher, what happens with his grandchildren? Read this later, or they go online and they search and they find this marriage. Here we are not disclosing it. So listen, it depends on the frame of reference, right? The other thing about obituaries, you all, remember how we write the spouse or the long-term friend is going to be Nicka, parentheses, in the name after it that's telling you who the person is. There's a rhyme and reason to all this. It was like the funeral program, like, structure got passed down somehow on an international and a national level to Black people, and we just all fall in line. I don't know if anybody studied this. There has to be a dissertation on this, on like Black funeral culture and funeral programs in particular, but maybe I need to like Google Scholar that to find that out. Right. They're not always just, well, that's the thing. Someone mentioned obituaries in the newspaper. That's the abbreviated version, because back in the day, they didn't charge you by word or by character to print them. That's the reason why they're not being published in papers today, is because it's expensive. They're charging people for them. Most people now they go to the funeral home having a website and posting the full form obituary. Yeah, again, I'm gonna be on Google Scholar, Dr. Adams, because I got to know if somebody wrote a dissertation on this. All right, we start with what we know. We capture that. We gather. Now we search. Okay, the search is to supplement what you don't already know and what you can't provide or you can't inform by the documents and things that you have in your possession. It is to supplement that. It is not to take the place of, and it can take the place of it if you don't have anything. But you don't want to assume that you don't have anything, because most of us do have something. Okay, folks ask me all the time, what are the best websites? And I'm going to tell you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find most of what you're looking for on Ancestry or Family Search. Now, the difference between Ancestry and Family Search is that Ancestry is a subscription-based website, okay? With that, you are accessing images of things like the census, like birth, marriage, and death certificates, military records, yearbook photos, city directories, the Freedmen's Bureau. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on about all the stuff, the billions of records that you can access as a result of Ancestry. But here's the thing. Accounts on Ancestry are free. Family trees are free. The fee comes into play with accessing the content. And it's not everything, because a lot of stuff is free. But again, it's accessing the content. With Family Search is connected to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons. Okay, it is a nonprofit arm of the Mormon Church that is there for genealogical purposes. Why? From Family Search's perspective, they have been preserving records starting on microfilm since the 1930s. They've been going around the world preserving records. And don't just think, oh, they're in Guatemala. No, they've gone to literally just about every county courthouse in the United States and microfilmed records there, from marriages to deeds to all that stuff. They started doing this stuff in the 30s. And they still are going around the world gathering documents. Family Search does not have a subscription. It is a free site. But here's the thing. If Ancestry is cost prohibitive for you, there are a few options. Number one, if you are a college student, there's a deeply discounted rate for students. If you are a part of a major library system, or you have access to your college library, most of them have access to the institutional version of Ancestry. It's holiday time. pay attention. That's all I'm going to say. And then with family search, you're just going to create an account. Okay. Now, the other thing that I will mention to you about family search is there are records that are on that site that they will not show you if you try to access them at home. You put in a search and you won't even see that it's there. But if you go into one of the many family search centers that are all across the world, you will get different results and you will see stuff that you cannot see at home. That's the caveat. Okay. If you're in Oakland, y'all already know about what we used to call Disneyland over there on Lincoln Avenue, right? In the Oakland Hills. Y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Lit up. It's one of the three, I think either 3 to 5 largest family history centers in the world exist in Oakland, California. What is there? Use of ancestry, use of computers, use of other subscriptions. You can go there when it's open. There are staff there. In fact, there is even an African-American research group that meets for support. So there's a lot of resources up there, right? And they take groups. Yes, right. They do. So again, 2 primary sites, ancestry and family search, and anywhere where the records are. There kind of is no catch-all for all of it, you all, because it all is a lot of factors. The geographic location where the records are, if it's in a different country, how open are they to third parties coming in and digitizing and accessing their records? And then from there, can you access the sites that they're on? How much is the subscription? From there, how are the records organized? There's a lot of things there's a lot of stuff you have to think about. That's why you have to be open to anywhere where the records are. Sometimes that's a state archives or a state library. Sometimes that is a historical society. Sometimes that's a university or a college, their archives. Literally, just think of it as I'm going to anywhere where I can get this information. But it's not going to all be in one place. You know, to use the collegiate experience as an example, if you're writing a dissertation and you only use one source, you only go to one repository, and that's supposed to serve all your sources for your dissertation, your advisor is going to be looking at you like you're crazy. You only went to Mississippi State Archives? You didn't go anywhere else, even online? No, you want a plethora of sources to aid your knowledge of all of this. And here's the other thing, as I'm talking about websites, and again, you also have to think about potentially going on site, meaning you're going to go and visit some of these places in person. Let me give you permission to go to these places, because I know that there was only so much that I could do from a research perspective by sitting behind a computer. There were brick walls and challenges that I was not able to overcome until I went to those places. And for some of us, it is the first time we have ventured to the Deep South. And it may be uncomfortable. I have to put that out there. Okay. So it's just something to think about. Right now, you're just online. Okay. Let's bask in the beauty of us being online for a little bit. All right. For the search, you can start from just a broad search online, right? Maybe you can find what you are in. Maybe you can look for your high school yearbook, maybe you in a city directory or a parent. But the most, I would say, important document from a US perspective that you can use to just, again, help you qualify your family history early on is the 1950 census. And the reason why I did not say the year of 2020 census is because there is a 72-year privacy hold on the US Census. So that means that we're not going to get the year 1960 until the year 2032, because we just got 1950. So you're going to be looking for anyone who is going to be born on be born by 1950, right? And the cutoff date is April 1st. So if someone was born before April 1st of 1950, they're going to be on the 1950 census, okay? And when you find them on that, you're going to find them hopefully in a family group with their parents or grandparents. And then you're going to use the information from that census to go back to the 1940 census. And then from that one to go to the 30, the 20, 1910, 1900. And then from 1900, we're going to make a jump to 1880. Why? Because the 1890 census was partially burned in a fire. And then the Commerce Department decided, you know what, it's partially burned. Don't nobody want it. Let's burn the whole thing. So many of us that have great grandparents like me who were born between 1890 and 1900, we're all struggling to find them as children because that census was destroyed. So you're going to make the jump from 1900 to 1880 to 1870. That is your hope and plan. Okay. Do it diligently. Do not feel like, and that's the thing, the online research environment makes it as though you want to try and get back as fast as you can, but you're missing so much breadth and you're missing so much depth when you choose to go back fast, when you're not reading through all the documents and what they say. In addition to the census, you're looking for vital records. If you hear that term, again, think of state vital records. What do? Birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates. You're looking for military records, things like draft cards from World War I, World War II. You're looking for enlistment information. If somebody was in the Navy, you can actually see when they went out to sea. You can see if you have an ancestor that was in World War I and they fought in France. You can see the ship manifest for them going out to France and them coming back. There's all kinds of stuff. If you're talking Caribbean roots, you can see when somebody was naturalized in the United States. You can even find records on enslaved people in the Caribbean as well as the United States. I mean, literally, there's just so much available. And again, I want to remind you, you're filling in what you don't already know, or you're not being able to be informed by the records and the things that you have in your possession with the online search. And you're going to fill in those gaps in your tree. You can start a tree on Ancestry or on Family Search, but the caveat that I want to give you about starting a tree on Family Search is that you can't control who edits it. It is in a format where anyone can go in and make changes, and you cannot stop them. With the free tree on Ancestry, it is yours, and only people that you invite can change it or see it. Family Search, I don't think you can, I'm pretty sure you cannot block who has access to see your tree public. All right, more search stuff. Focus on one line at a time, y'all. You gonna get caught in the matrix. Y'all know naming patterns. I'm not the only one who has 2 generations of people with the same name in their family because the uncle decided to name all his kids after his siblings. Today I saw a woman. Oh Lord, I was praying for this lady, Miss Maddie. She had 19 children, 2 sets of twins. And I just was hoping in the by and by that woman is taking good naps, because I could not believe that she had that many kids, right? And when you see that on a census form, it stresses you out. Do not jump from family to family, okay? Don't do that. Try your best to stick on one branch at a time, right? Maybe you follow your grandfather and you go through his dad to start. And if you don't hit pay dirt there, okay, maybe I need to get more information. Then you go through your grandfather's mother, your great grandmother. But don't hop, skip, and jump, because a lot of our families were in the same counties and parishes for a long time, and the names are going to start to be similar. We all got a set of sisters named Mary and Martha. You know, why am I looking at the census in 1940 for somebody and they got a brother named Joe L. and I already know that man's name was Joe Lewis, or a Thomas E. is Thomas Edward, or J.W. is a John Wesley. We all got those names on both sides of the family. If you stick to one line at a time, it will help you. Oh Lord, there is a woman in the chat that has a grandmother who had 21 siblings. That stresses me out, Ife. I don't know how they did it. I wasn't built for that. That's okay. Acknowledge you wasn't built for that. I wasn't built for that. All right. Lord, spelling doesn't count. And for some of you, this is really going to bother you, because especially with the babies, right? My name is spelled But you know, like we have empowered our baby so much with how my name is spelled and how you pronounce my name, which I love that. But you have to think about the rise in literacy and the fact that we don't get to this critical mass that we are at right now until we enter this time, which is the 21st century. And again, with people not having the ability to read and write, where you are seeing people document their signature with an X as opposed to a signature, Black people were at the mercy of other people to document us, which is why we have a lot of challenges finding consistencies in our records. If you had to rely on, well, my mama said I was born and the sun was coming up and it was right before they harvested the cotton. And I remember I saw a 1928 Ford Model T and so and so had just bought it. You see how there's all these little hallmarks, right? The sunrise told you the time. The almost harvest told you the time of year. The car told you about the year that the person was born. People had hallmarks like that. And depending on your age, because for some of us, you know, we use retinol, right? Retinol for us is the way that folks' age started going down the older they got. That's how we do it, is retinol, peptides, right? Collagen. That's how our age starts going down in reverse order as we get older, even though the numeric number on paper is not changing. For people back then, that number is not always static. So you're going to really stick to about a 10-year time span until you get to people born probably the 1930s. And for some of you, you're like, well, wait a minute, they just have birth certificates. No, they don't. That's a 20th century invention for most of America. So you should not be looking for birth certificates or expecting them, I should say, for people born really before like 1925. If you find them, wonderful. But there's a high possibility that it's not a thing. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. We have this in Nicodemus. Our first town historian was known as both Lula and Lulu. Right. That's very common. Hattie, Harriet. I saw Zach or Zachariah. Or I saw a man yesterday. The man's name was Jeff Eddy. That was his name. On records, they put Jeff Edward. No, he was clear. His name was Jeff Eddy. So you got to search for both. Okay. So again, spelling doesn't count. What's more important is who's in the family group with them. Do the names of the siblings and the children match? Does the name of the spouse match? Does the birth location match? Does the age match? There's someone who put in the chat, my grandmother in Louisiana is listed as Corrine and Corinne, right? With one N and two N's, depending on who completed the birth and death certificate. Right. Just be prepared for that. And since we speaking of Louisiana, note identifiers for race, okay? But do not get caught up in, well, they said they was mulatto. Listen, I always tell a story about my grandma, funeral program grandma, right? When I told you she handed me the funeral programs on the 1920 census, when she is a 4-year-old child, my grandmother is marked mulatto. Now, when I told her this, oh, you would have swore I had turned into Flip Wilson or Eddie Murphy because my grandmother was howling. She could not believe that anybody would document her as mulatto. What are they talking about? I ain't never been biracial. You know, she didn't say biracial, but I ain't never been white. And I said, well, here's the thing. They looked at your mother and they said, oh, well, she the mom, then all these kids is mulatto. So pay attention to that, especially when you start getting into the 20th century. That's when people's races start to shift. When you start to see them move west and they go from being Black to being white. It's a possibility. Read everything. Do not hop, skip, and jump. Don't do that because you will miss important information. The US Census in particular, it captures so much stuff. Like for a woman, we talk about the woman with the 19 children or the woman with the 21 children. Some censuses will tell you how many children she birthed in total, as opposed to how many were living. Censuses will tell you when two partners married. and how many years they have been married. Some censuses have the month and the year a person was born. On the census, you get an occupation. You will find out if somebody owned or rented their land, whether or not they had a clock in the house, how much rent they were paying, the street address. All of that and more is on the US Census. But if you were just focused on, oh, well, there goes my Aunt May, and that's it, and you move into the next one, you're going to miss all that depth. DNA is a backup. And here's the thing. Folks think that you can take a DNA test and it is going to tell you everything that I'm telling you. And while we want that technology to be available, it is not available yet. You still have to put in the sweat equity. Okay. And what I mean by DNA being a backup is, with DNA being a backup, it is there to confirm or reject that the tree that you have built is biologically connected to you. In DNA testing, you have to be prepared for your parents who you were told were your parents to not be that, or that phenomenon exists for your grandparents or your parents, right? Even though, again, as folks, as adamant as people act, well, my so-and-so, that's impossible. You weren't there. We don't know. Okay. And sometimes it only comes out in the wash from a genetic standpoint. Okay. So using the chat for everyone who's here, and this is not to shame anyone, but this slide is here so that folks recognize how many ancestors we have by generation of the family. Okay. 4 grandparents. There are some folks here who can't name all 4 grandparents. For me, I thought I could. And then I found out one of them was not my biological grandparent. So then I had to go on the journey of trying to find out who that was. Now I have a name for that. But that didn't surface until DNA, right? So there's a family story. We are part Native American, and I don't have one drop. I can tell you why by looking at this chart. Each generation, the number of ancestors you have doubles. And depending on when this alleged Native American ancestor, and in my experience, the person is always full-blooded, fill in the blank. And folks ain't never quarter, they ain't never half, they ain't never 75%. It's always full-blooded, fill in the blank. And then people take DNA tests and they don't see the percentage that they expected to get. Why? It depends on when that person falls in your family tree. For instance, if the person who was supposed to be quote unquote full-blooded is a great-great-great-grandparent, if there is not another person who marries into your family with that same lineage, your ability to capture that part of your ancestry gets cut in half every single generation until it doesn't go to you. So if it's a great-great-great-grandparent, their children are only 50%, their grandchildren are only a quarter, your grandparent is only 12%, then that means your parent is only 6%, and then you could only potentially inherit 3%. It's pure math. Or for many of us, well, her so-and-so was white. Okay, that is much more easy to be surfaceable. But some of our folks don't want to hear that. No, they don't. We don't want to hear that somebody's ancestor, instead of them being Native American, that they were white. But here is the other caveat to this, you all. What I also need you to understand is that statistically speaking, white Southern Americans have more African ancestry than any other place in the United States. So there was a lot going on both sides. That's why I'm pointing that out to everybody. Okay, that we maybe just, again, we're not aware of until we get to DNA testing. So if you just, again, hopefully you have the ability to trace all 64 of your great-great-great-great-grandparents. I have yet to do that. I don't even have all the names of my 3 times great. I don't have that. I don't. There's lines where I have a hypothesis, but I haven't been able to confirm it from a genetic standpoint or even on paper. There are some people who are very lucky who can get to this, but not everybody can. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Now, let's get into records, because I know that's what you all want to see. What are the types of things you can find? For most Americans, they are looking for something like this, which is a ship manifest of people coming in to New York as immigrants. And if you look very closely at this document, you have a lot of information. such as things like whether the person is in possession of $50 or less, if so, how much, by whom was the passage paid, the final destination of the individuals, the race of people, the nationality, their literacy, their calling or occupation, their names, their gender identities, their marital status. All of this stuff, in addition to, and I'm just reading this because this is what's on the document, whether a polygamist, whether an anarchist, and again, this is how people referred to back then: deformed or crippled, nature, length of time, and cause, condition of health, mental and physical. All of this was captured for immigrants. But if we're talking about enslaved people in the United States, instead of having a ledger or a list or a form that exists in this aspect, right? This long aspect, we don't have this. Many of those statistical records that exist like this actually look more like this. You're going to get all the nuts and bolts. They're going to be able to count beans around how many of you can read or write, or whether or not you were deformed, crippled, or you were a polygamist or anarchist, but it's not going to be associated with the name. And here's where I redirect your attention to that libation we did earlier. Because we are holding space for millions of formerly enslaved people who before are elected officials and before our state, federal, even community people, they were nameless only until they needed to be named because there was a financial incentive. Now, how do I know this? Well, let's talk about the slave schedules, because many of you have watched genealogy on television and you've seen people pointing to blank lines. It irritates me. Why? Because Congress had two opportunities to make a national list of enslaved people, and Congress decided not to. The two opportunities were in 1850 and in 1860. And when it was brought before Congress, right? Congress has to fund the US Census. Congress had a debate on the floor as to whether or not it was prudent to write down the names of all 4 million enslaved people in the United States. And there was one senator in particular, a man named Andrew Pickens Butler, and I hope you continue to call his name out in the way in which you want to after you hear it tonight. Because that's why I bring him up every time I do this presentation, because I want y'all to know who to be angry at. Okay? Andrew Pickens Butler from South Carolina. And some of y'all are picking up on what this image is indicating because you're reading it. But Andrew Pickens Butler said, well, for a plantation owner that has a whole bunch of slaves, and several of them are known by some delineation like Big Margaret or Little Margaret, how can they tell the difference between them? Not when it's money walking out on two legs. Not when you can mortgage against me breathing. Not when you have promised my child to the institution. Do you not know my name? And in this area where it says name of slave owners, y'all, the original version of this said name of slave. And they revised it to put names of owners. And so it became a census of slave owners, not of the enslaved. It is just counting them. Why is it egregious for you to point to a line and say that that's someone's ancestor? Because, heck, this 10-year-old, 7-year-old female could be me. I could be here because of Back to the Future. How in the world do you know that that's not me or it isn't me? There's no name associated with it. The reason why I share this particular slave schedules is because it's one for Andrew Pickens Butler. For the senator who argued to not include names, he was a slaveholder. And to quote him directly, the census heretofore taken has only required the numbers of slaves. So I want to make it clear, enslaved people were counted on every census since the first one in 1790. It was just numbers of them. And they moved to document their names in 1850 and again in 1860. But he says he sees no useful information the obtaining of names can afford. On a plantation where there are 100, 200, or 300 slaves, there are perhaps several of the same name and who are simply known by some familiar designation on the plantation. It can afford no useful information and will make a great deal of labor. Now, explain to me how much more labor it was to just write the name down if you already wrote down their age, gender identity, and race. Did it actually take that much more time and pen and ink to do that? No, it did not. This man enslaved 64 people. So when you get mad because you cannot find names easily, here is one person that you direct that energy to. And think about these scores of elected officials in Congress who co-signed this. And the fact that their descendants can likely find them easily because we have biographies of everybody who's ever served in Congress and in the Senate. They got a whole website. Have y'all ever seen that? You can search for anybody who has been in the House and the Senate, and it will tell you all the biography, everything about them, even a photo of them. Yes, what a shame. So how in the world do you find enslaved people? It's a multitude of means. We are going to have a session where I go over with you ways, the shortcuts that I have helped to develop and I use to try to find enslaved people. But there is no magic cure-all. There is no magic snap of the fingers. You can't even go based off of last names, because enslaved people were walking into their personhood, which means that they could choose the name that they wanted to. So making an assumption that Sewell was my family's last slaveholder, no, it wasn't. Now, unless you have a clear oral history, don't even go that route. Don't even go for the nearest white person to your ancestors living in the same county. We're going to talk about all those tropes when we get to researching the enslaved. But what I want you to see are the multitudes of ways you can find enslaved people. With this is a deed. If you own any property, whether it's a home or you sold a car, or anything like that, you have to have a property transfer. And back in the day, when property transfers were taking place, which included farmland and implements and homes, especially plantations, you will find the names of enslaved people within those transactions. And this is one from about 1808. And note in yellow, highlighted, it says Negro men slaves named Ben, Cook, Dick, Tom, Hardy, Frank, Peter, Charles, and Jake, and Negro women slaves Sophia, Charlotte, Zuiga, Poella, Kowamba, and the children slaves Jack, Sophia, and Lucy. And this wasn't in a quote unquote northern state that abolished slavery later. This is in Mississippi where this. Right? Do not think that just because it's in a deep South state that there aren't records, okay? Probates and succession, someone passes away, where's their property going? Who's going to inherit the house? Who's going to inherit the car, right? Who's going to inherit the land that they pay taxes on, that the family still has back where our family's from, and no one lives there, but we still pay the taxes because of historical significance. All of that, these are all things that still happen today, but back in the day prior to 1865, you are going to find enslaved people's names intertwined with all of this stuff. This is an example of a record that's attached to a probate, or what's called a succession in Louisiana. It's the exact same thing. And there's a myth that there are no records, or that slaves are not named in records. Not true. Not when we were the biggest commodity in the United States. That's not the case. So for this probate and succession, you see it says item 2, Negroes. King, age 55, his wife, Rachel, age 55, William, age 19, and which is short for Andrew, age 19, for a value of $4,500. A lot of times on probates and successions, they would bundle all of the enslaved together into lots so that if the estate was insolvent or if it had too many debts, and it needed to start selling property off, they could easily sell off enslaved people because they knew what they could get for them. Now, for most of the documents I'm going to share with you all, they have a connection back to my own family. King and Rachel are my great-great-great-grandparents. And if you read further down on this inventory a little bit, Little King, that's my great-great-grandfather. Remember the grandmother that I told you about that had the obituaries and that they listed her as mulatto on the census? Little King is her grandfather. That's how close slavery is. My grandmother's grandparents were slaves. More, who in the world is Drusilla? I didn't know that my great-great-grandfather had a wife named Drusilla until I found him as an enslaved man. I had no idea because my great-great-grandmother's name is Alice. So I'm like, who is Drusilla? Then I researched her, found out she was sold to Louisiana from Baltimore, Maryland. And that 17-year-old boy who's on the census with my great-grandfather as a brother is the child of these two parents. Would not have known that had I not found him as an enslaved person. Now, let's move outside of the United States because guess what? Britain had more sense than we do. And I think some folks will probably think that maybe that's the case today, that Britain still has more sense than we do. And that's arguable. But one of the things that British colonial dependencies or places that were settled by Britain did was they created slave registers. So instead of them botching the opportunity to document the enslaved populations in these places multiple times, Britain and their colonial dependencies didn't do that. So you're looking at a slave register from Trinidad in 1834. And British colonial dependencies include Antigua, the Bahamas, Barbados, Berbice, Dominica, Grenada, Honduras, Jamaica, Mauritius, Nevis, Sri Lanka, St. Christopher, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Tobago, Trinidad, and the Virgin Islands. If you have connections back to those places, and again, if you are stateside Black, don't think that you don't, because even I have ancestors that ended up in Jamaica. Also, slavery ended earlier in British colonial dependencies. It ended, 31 years earlier than it did in the United States. More records. Again, sometimes you're just going to get totals. This is an appraiser certificate from the Union Bank of Mississippi. I got this in a series of records that are connected to a slaveholding family. And this is how much they appraise this person's 4,500 acres worth of land and 200 plus enslaved people, which include 75 children, 74 women, and 75 men. We don't get names, but we know that they lived in 61 different houses because the Negro cabins were valued at $900. More records. Here's the thing. There are ship manifests that exist, but they're not for the time period that people think they are. Most folks think, oh, well, transatlantic slave trade, they had to have rolls of folks. Not the way that they were peddling people. That's not how that worked. For them, it was how they were paying for people by the pound, you all. Now, when the importation of enslaved people from Africa was prohibited in the United States, as per our original United States Constitution, which called for its ban in 1808, if you were going to transport enslaved people by water within the bounds of the United States, you had to have a ship manifest and you had to declare who the shipper was and who the receiver was. Many of these manifests exist, but not all of them do. The other thing you have to think about, and this is very sobering, is the fact that if someone was taken from a place like Virginia or North Carolina, their slaveholder had to have been of a certain wealth for them to ship them by water or not having a high number of enslaved people. Most of them were walked. And we don't have no walking manifests. They don't exist. So when you do get ship manifests, you have one like this one from 1826 with a 21-year-old young lady named Esther, who was 5 feet tall, whose shipper or owner is a man named George Little of Alabama, and a 4-year-old little boy named Ben, who was 2 feet 6 inches tall, who was also enslaved by a man named George Little. And they were bound from the port of New Orleans to the port of Mobile. So this was a short ride. If you've ever been to New Orleans, you know that Mobile is not that far away from New Orleans, but they took a boat as opposed to being on land. Freedmen's Bureau, we're going to talk a lot about this when we talk about researching the enslaved. And with the Freedmen's Bureau, it was established by Congress in 1865, and it had a number of functions, things like issuing rations, labor contracts, which were between the formerly enslaved and a lot of times their former slave owner. The formerly enslaved could file complaints about how they were being treated in those contracts or complain about racial violence. The Freedmen's Bureau had a court. They were also over the U.S. colored troops for a time. They had 1,000,001 different things that they did. And as a part of the records of rations, you're looking at one from 1867 in Louisiana. And this is a report of indigent or helpless freedmen in, I think this is in St. James Parish, or actually maybe no, I think it's in Iberia Parish, Louisiana. And look at this. It's in red, you see it says name of former owner. Sometimes you will look out and you'll get a document that says owner, where you're not digging and trying to find it. On this document, pay attention. There are 2 100-year-old people who were getting rations in 1867, which places their birth year at 1767, which is before the United States was the United States. Now, again, there's no guarantee your ancestors took the same last name as their slaveholder. I have a whole branch of my family. If you think of obituary grandma, right, where you saw those folks on that inventory, you saw her grandparents, her great grandparents. Them people did not choose the name of that slave owner. That slave owner's name was short. My family never took the last name short. They took the last name Atlas. They took a made up last name because them folks made a decision. They wasn't carrying that man's name. Now, of course, that made it a challenge for me for 20 some years because I'm trying to find out who the slave owner is. And had I paid attention to my aunt who told me we bought the plantation, and I'm thinking she went senile, like, what she mean we bought the plantation? She wasn't wrong. Her uncle bought the plantation, y'all. But how did I know that? Until I found the deed record where Uncle John, who's on the same inventory, he bought a plantation called Winterfield. And when I did the research, I mapped the township range and section, and part of it was the plantation that they were enslaved on. So she wasn't wrong. I disregarded my aunt. Can I go back and ask her? No, she lived to be 103, but she wasn't wrong. Now, what if your people were free people of color? Some of you may never even have heard of this term, but 10% of the population of Black folks in the United States before the Civil War were free, meaning that they were not enslaved. You will find them on the US Census by name prior to 1870. 1870 is the first census where everyone, in theory, regardless of how whatever their status was prior to the Civil War, they are on that census by name. But before that, you will only find free people. In fact, the top of the census says free inhabitants. And for most free people of color, there were rules and restrictions against them where they had to go and register yearly. People have this whole thought process. Oh, they was free. They was living like us. No, they weren't. Black folks, free or enslaved, were often under the exact same laws. So was that really free or not? This is the certificate of freedom that I got from the Maryland State Archives on their website for a woman named Flubella Gaither. I have no idea how I'm related to this woman, but her descendants are sharing DNA with me. And the only clue I have is that my third great grandfather from the Sewells is from this part of Maryland. So at some point, my ancestor was sold and enslaved. I know when and who his slaveholder was in Maryland, but someone in his family was free. Slew of people in his family were free. And note on here, it gives a description of Flubella Gaither, her age, her height. Note that it says that the certificate was granted on the affidavit of someone named James Newton. And the date was July 16th of 1860. There's also a myth that we can't find ancestors born in Africa. Here is a clipping from the 1870 census in Wilkinson County, Mississippi. And I want to point out to you this 90-year-old woman who has a birthplace of Africa. Some of you will encounter this. If you do the math on her age, she was born about 1780. So that's prior to the importation ban, which was in 1808. Now, more often than not, you will find ancestors that were born in Africa, and it's listed that they were, but there's a higher likelihood that it won't say where in Africa. It's just going to give you the continent. Now, let's say you have more recent connections back to Africa. Well, on Family Search, you can find the census for Ghana. They aren't as restrictive on records, right? So this is one from 1982. So if you have family that was living in Ghana at least that late, you can research them on the census from 1982. Again, many of these records I'm telling you about don't just exist in the United States, they exist all over the world. Now, we talked about Native American folks. Most people are going to have alleged connections going back to what are considered the 5 tribes, especially if you're talking California, okay? If you have ancestors who stepped foot in Oklahoma and maybe went from there to a place like Kansas City, and then maybe went to a place like Seattle or Los Angeles, there is a high likelihood that your family are freedmen of the 5 tribes, meaning the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee Creek, Seminole, and Cherokee nations. Those citizens of those nations prior to 1866, notice I didn't say 1865, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. Citizens of those 5 nations were slaveholding, meaning they enslaved Black people. And I said 1866 because the 13th Amendment and the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to the Indian Territory, because all of those nations were sovereign nations within the bounds of the United States. So in order for slavery to end in those places, they had to enter into a different treaty with the United States government. Now, if your ancestors are connected to those nations and have been connected to them since the forced removal, also known as the Trail of Tears, you may or may not have an ancestor who has what's called a Dawes card, and you're looking at a Dawes card. There were more than 3,000 enslaved people on the Trail of Tears. I did not say that they were walking hand in hand singing Kumbaya with the people from the 5 tribes. They were there as enslaved people. With Dawes cards, this is what was used in order for people to get their citizenship, okay? So those of you who have connections to the 5 tribes, you may hear someone talk about a roll number or a Dawes number or somebody getting their citizenship. And with these Dawes cards, these are the litmus tests for whether or not your descendants can get citizenship today. Now, let me say this even more plainly. The only nations offering citizenship to descendants of freedmen who are individuals who were formerly enslaved by citizens of these nations, and again, in my experience, most of these descendants are not just descendants of the enslaved, they are descendants of quote unquote by blood people. The only nation that offers citizenship to those people at current is the Cherokee Nation and the Seminole Nation. So even if you find an ancestor with a Chickasaw, a Choctaw, or a Creek card and it's approved, you send in your stuff, they will reject you because you descend from the slaves, which is technically violating the treaty with the US government, which is why this has been in litigation. It's currently in litigation right now for the Muskogee Creek Nation, because you cannot argue tribal sovereignty all the way up to the US Supreme Court in a case like McGirt and use the same treaty that says that your former slaves are citizens of your nation. That's why it's in litigation. So, with that said, this is a card, and I'm giving you all this because there's plenty of you in the live space who have connections or think you have connections back to Native American groups. And this is a rejected card for a man who walked the Trail of Tears. They said that he did not fulfill all the requirements for the Treaty of 1866. It also has the name of his slaveholder, and he's 104 years old. Now, pictures, you will find them in all sorts of places, including spots like the Oklahoma Historical Society. Maybe family members will post them on places like Ancestry or Family Search. This is a photo of the day the Cherokee Bill was captured in Oklahoma in the Cherokee Nation. Circled in red is my great-great-grandfather, a man named Isaac Rogers, who was portrayed on the series Lawmen Bass Reeves by a man named Justin Hurt Dunkley. So if you watch that series on Paramount Plus, you saw somebody playing my ancestor. If we're talking about marriage records in places like the Caribbean, they have larger databases called civil registrations, which include birth, marriage, and death records. This is a marriage certificate from Calvin McCullough and Melissa Straker, who were both living in Kingston, Jamaica, and they got married on December 7th of 1915. If you thought that Fenty was a made-up last name or just something that sounds cute on makeup, that is not the case. That is a real last name in Barbados. This is an indexed record of a baptism of a little boy named James William Thomas Fenty in Barbados on August 23rd of 1865. Military, my favorite record to show, World War II draft cards. You get everything from the person's address. Note this man was born in New Orleans, but he was living in San Jose, California as of August 7th of 1942. He was working at Wilson's Cafeteria on University Avenue in Palo Alto. And he was literate because you see his signature is there. They also give his height, his weight, his eye color, his hair color, and they tell you that he had a scar on his right forearm. More census records. This is the 1950 census. This is for a man named Lamont Dunn, who was living in New Orleans. He is a tractor driver at a sugar manufacturer. It's him and his wife, Viola, and their slew of children. Ife, stressing me out, all these kids that are in this household. But it's him and his oldest son, who is 15 years old, who are working, and his wife is working at a sugar manufacturer. Yearbooks, one of my personal favorites. Do not think that they don't have them for Black people. They do, and they even have them for HBCUs. This is a yearbook where you see Miss Cute Pat Lewis with her hair just laid, and all the other young ladies who were sitting there who were part of the finance committee at their school. Additionally, we also have things such as newspapers. This is a hugely underutilized resource, especially in the Black community, because we forget we have Black press. And we have Black papers that will cover our news, especially if you are in the plain states like Kansas and Oklahoma and Missouri. We have great newspapers on places like newspapers.com, which is under the Ancestry umbrella, along with sites such as Fold 3. And I'm going to touch on DNA briefly before we wrap, because I want to also reinforce to you all that your DNA results are going to change. In fact, I need to update this slide because we just got a new update. So if you are trying to find places in Africa that your ancestry traces to, you can take a number of tests, but the more wide-ranging ones are the ones that are called autosomal, and those apply to both sides of your family. Something else that I also want to point out is, remember, if we go back to that slide with the number of grandparents that we were talking about, if you're trying to find an exact group of people back in Africa, you have to realize that when you get back to your transatlantic slave trade ancestors, those people are not all coming from the exact same country. Due to the nature of the trade, they're coming from a lot of different places. They may come, the majority of them might come from Nigeria, but they're not all coming from the exact same place. Or you might have some from Ghana, you might have some from Senegal, you might have some from Sierra Leone, you might have some from Nigeria. You have to weigh that in when you're talking about your DNA. All right, let's get to questions.
Okay, this is Kim with ETM Media moderating. I am going to ask Rochelle Price to come up and ask a question. You've been waiting so very patiently. All right, you've been asked to unmute. And we've got about a minute for questions because we are at time. So thank you, Rochelle. You've got the floor. Okay, I'm not hearing Rochelle. It looks like your mic is unmuted. Could you try saying a few words? Okay, Rochelle has muted her mic. So I'm going to bring PDH up, and this will be our last question of the evening since we are running short on time, but we hope that you will join us for the remainder of the series. PDH, the floor is yours. I've asked you to unmute.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have questions from them. Do you want to try with Dr. Brown really quickly?
Oh, hello. I didn't know I was going to get an opportunity to ask a question. I joined late and it was amazing. I'm very good friends with Dr. McDowell. I see she's in the room. Hi, Evelyn. And I was wondering, would it be an opportunity to view this from the beginning? Because I just got the notice today and I had another appointment. I would love to see this. And what I saw was amazing. Thank you.
I can answer that question. Hi, Dr. Brown. Yes, we are going to be uploading all three of the genealogy workshop series onto the Black Reparations Project website eventually after they have ended. And if you officially registered for this event, you will get the email from us once we get everything uploaded. And I think you might even get a copy of this before that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
All right, I don't think we have any more questions, Kim, if you wanted to say anything. And I just want to say, Nicka, that was amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think everyone is just blown away by this presentation, and I learned so much. I took so many notes here today.
Thanks so much for having me. And to answer the question, someone said, will either of you attend Roots Tech? I will be at Roots Tech.
Awesome. Kim is gonna share a few things with us before we leave. If you all have about 5 or 7 more minutes, we just have a few other announcements and upcoming events that we wanted to share.
Yes, I will be really quick. Just a few updates related to reparations. I agree. This was a wonderful presentation on genealogy, which is very relevant in this reparation space in which we work, ETM Media Group. We were kind of born just specifically to follow this reparations movement. We knew that we were embarking on a historic journey, and we said we have to capture all of this, to make it available to the public to educate people. So, where we're at in California, the California Reparations Task Force held a 2-year study, and that they determined that eligibility for reparations in California, you would need to be able to trace a ancestor back to the 1900 census, either an enslaved ancestor or a free ancestor. So as long as you can trace back to an ancestor on the 1900 census, that is the criteria of eligibility that the task force set out. So that's why this genealogy discussion is so very important. And also when Nicka mentioned the Freedmen's Bureau, which was a bureau established to help freedmen, with a host of resources. That's what we set out to do in California with the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. We had a bill move through the legislature for that last session, and one to create a funding mechanism. Unfortunately, those bills, SB 1403 and SB 1331, did not get voted on in the assembly floor. So we'll be going back next year to get that accomplished. So just want everybody to be aware of that. If anybody is in California looking for more information on this reparations movement, again, you can follow us, ETM Media Group, on YouTube. And also you can sign up for information and updates at CJEC official.org. That is a advocacy coalition that does nothing but advocates for reparations. So that is a great resource to get more information on what's going on out here in California. And again, this was a wonderful presentation this evening. I was taking notes.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that update. And I would encourage you all, if you're looking to learn more about what's happening, please follow ETM. They put the YouTube channel in the chat. Click on it, and like they say on YouTube, like and subscribe, so you can keep up with what's happening, because they're keeping up with all the latest news. I would like to go ahead and close us out now and ask if we can share our final 4 slides that we wanted to share with you all before you sign off, just to give you a few more resources to learn from if you're interested. And are we able to put those slides up, you all, or do I need to do that?
Okay, I'll be doing it shortly.
Okay. So while we're working on that, I just again want to say thank you to our sponsors. One of the slides that I wanted to share was, if you are looking to learn more about what is happening in the reparations space, the Black Reparations Project actually has a repository of links. And when we get the slides up, you'll be able to see. But you can just go to our website, actually, and I can put the website in the chat as well. We have a repository of different reparations initiatives, different committees and commissions that are in operation across the nation, different advocacy groups that are sharing, updates on things that are happening, maybe in your community or your city where you are. The other thing is, if you're interested in partnering with us, we're going to put our email in the chat as well. It's an email. And the last thing that I wanted to share was, actually, if you do get the slides up, you can just do the last slide, which is slide 7. I think that we have Angela Bates here. I would like to give a shout out to Angela Bates, who is our retiring founding executive director at the Nicodemus Historical Society. And We also have Deborah Jackson here, who is a director at CLEAR, which is the Center for Law, Equity, and Race at Northeastern University Law School. And I actually wanted to invite them both if they wanted to say a few words. Don't feel any pressure. Deborah, I know that you have an upcoming event that we wanted to promote. I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that, or Angela, if you wanted to say anything. I will unmute you now, or give you, you should be
Okay,
able to
Ashley.
unmute yourself.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think you're gonna have to share your screen.
Oh, okay. Angela, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just want to say this is fantastic. I've been involved, obviously, for a number of years, doing the kind of research that you guys are talking about here. Obviously, not reviewing all the kind of records because of where the folks came from that established Nicodemus. But I think this is absolutely fantastic. I know for a long time I've been out there. I felt like a lone wolf, looking at records, uncovering slave records, slave marriage records, things like that. And I think it's great to point out that everything, all of this stuff is really geographical too. You're going to find different records in different places depending on the state and how they kept records and all. And I did want to mention too about the records that relate to homesteading and people that are actually owning property or homesteading. Those records are now being collaborated with a couple of different resources through the universities and what have you. But what you guys are doing is fantastic. I'm glad to be a part of this, and my hat is off to all of you. This next generation of African Americans that are really interested in finding our roots. I think this is great. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. We're so happy you're here. Thank you for your kind words. Deborah, you want to unmute yourself? I actually am going to share my screen. If you wanted to say a few words and say anything about, can you all see the purple screen with the flyer?
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. The presentation was fabulous, and it's on behalf of CLEAR, we're proud to be sponsors of this series and look forward to the 2 additional sessions that are upcoming. I just wanted to extend an invitation to people who are online. If you're in Boston, please come by tomorrow at 11:30. We're serving lunch for a discussion with Professor Patricia Williams and Linda Greenhouse, who will be in conversation with one another about race, human bodies, and the spirit of the law. We're focusing on the most recent book by Patricia Williams, The Miracle of the Black Leg, Notes on Race, Human Bodies, and the Spirit of the Law. It's not too late to register, so if you're not in Boston, the event will be live streamed, and we'd love to have you present. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. So it will be live streamed. Can you, if you scan to register, will you get the live stream link? On this flyer, it says scan to register. Does that?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Any of our panelists? Okay. Thank you so much, Nicka, for starting this off right and getting us all excited about the next genealogy workshop series, which is going to be held on, what day is it going to be held on, you all? November 12th. And that one is going to be, as Nicka was saying, on researching the formerly enslaved. So we hope to see you all there and hope you have a nice evening. Thank you, everybody. Bye.